Hello and welcome. Now there are many reasons to come to Davos. It's a wonderful place to feel and touch and slip on the snow, but one of my favorite reasons is that you meet somebody like Raghuram Rajan. Thank you very much for joining us. You're looking like you have been under... How many speeches have you given? How many interviews?
Well, a few, but it's a pleasure being with you.
It's wonderful to be with you. I miss our old annual criticisms of the economy.
Yes. Well, hopefully I was defending. Hopefully I was defending. Yes.
Yeah, but so much has happened since you've been away. And may I just say that India misses you. However, I'm not sure if you miss India, do you?
No, I miss. Well, I miss India and I keep coming back. So.
Yeah, so you get a feel for it as well. And I'm sure you follow it a lot from Chicago, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, in the last year, just coming to the Indian economy, then we'll move a bit to the global economy. The Indian economy, last year was, the global economy rebounded. So Europe was a big surprise, America did very well. India didn't seem to take advantage of that. Why is that? What did India miss out on last year?
Well, we had two big headwinds, right? We had first the lingering effects of the demonetization, which pushed into 2017. And then we had GST. Now, I think long-term GST will have very positive effects. And I mean, there are people who say we should have prepared better, we should have delayed it. My sense is many of the problems just come from doing it. Right. So if we solve those problems and go forward, that will be very beneficial. But I think when people look at the growth effects, yes, those were big effects. And, you know, we've been held back. Relative to the world economy. Most other countries have had the growth figures updated. We've had them downgraded. And that's partly because of these headwinds. I think there is an emerging issue now, which is with the oil price.
Yes.
And the question is, how much does this subtract from growth? Because we obviously benefited when it went the other way. And now this will affect us negatively.
You mean when it came down from almost twice what it is today, down to about 50, 45, and now it's back up to 60, 65?
Right, right. So when it came down, since we import oil, it showed up as an addition to GDP. Now when it's going up, it will show up as a subtraction because our imports will go up. And that certainly is a source for concern going forward, because that hasn't yet registered in the GDP data.
On the GST, a lot of people say it's overcomplicated, too many rates, it could have been simple. But you're right, implementing anything as big as that, it was a good policy.
Yes.
But you're saying demonetization was not even a good policy. It's not how it was implemented.
Well, I think the jury is still out. We haven't had the last...
Jury's out on demonetization?
No. We have sort of an argument that it will improve compliance. Till we see the last tax numbers in, I think the jury is still out. That said, I would suspect that a substantial part of the growth slowdown was because of the effects. Some of it was in the informal economy, which weren't immediately captured, which we're seeing now. Businesses that have shut down because they couldn't survive that episode. Now, are there any positives? We have to wait and see. I mean, I think it did give some fillip to the payment system, but you know, that's
digital payments.
Digital payments, but that's relatively small.
There are other ways to do
the
that.
Yeah.
Tough question. You would never have done demonetization.
Well, this is an easy sort of answer to give in hindsight. I think the government at that time asked us our views. We gave them. But at the same time, I think it's very hard.
What was your view?
Well, I didn't think it would have the desired effect and that it would have costs. But I think
most economists tend to agree with you on that.
Well, yes, I mean, any monetary economist would say that you better print the money before taking it away. But that said, I think the real sort of question is, should the RBI be a fifth column? If the government wants to go ahead on something.
Right.
And my guess is both legally as well as ethically, you can't stop the institution. You may refuse to go along with it, but you cannot stop the institution.
Right. But that is a very crucial aspect in any democracy, to have an independent reserve bank or a monetary authority. Is that being eroded a bit, not just by this government, but historically?
Well, I think that there are always steps forward and steps backward, and you have to look at the net effect.
At least you didn't give me the Indian answer, which is says it all depends.
That's an economist's answer. But I'd say if you want to look at positives, I think the job that this Monetary Policy Committee is doing has been a really good one, in the sense that it has withstood tremendous pressure. The usual pressure in some sense that governors used to face, but it has faced it and has, stuck its ground. I'm not commenting on whether its grounds are right or wrong, but it has said inflation is a problem. That is why we're staying with these rates where they are. And as we see inflation come back up, more people are recognizing that it had some merit in what it was saying.
So you were okay with the Monetary Policy Committee. Do you think that kind of eroded a bit because it has some government officials in it?
Well, it has government appointees. I mean, that said, we're all government appointees. As the central bank governor or the deputy governor, we are appointed. The only non-appointee is actually the chief economist of the central bank, the executive director in charge of monetary policy, who's an RBI who moves up the RBI ranks. But that's the only person who's not appointed by the government. This is entirely, and it should be, a government appointed committee. However, once the government appoints, they should leave it to do what its job is.
Yeah, which is very tough for all Indian governments, the way they interfere with all public sector. It's a tough one. So over the years, is that a worry that there's a trend towards less independence of the RBI?
Well, I don't think so. Again, I do think that the amount of freedom you have in various ways is substantial. I do think there is a constant tussle between the bureaucrats, between the finance ministry and the RBI, and in a sense this was engineered. If you go back to the documents of the 1930s, you find that there were these kinds of issues of turf, who governs this, who governs that. Right. And as I said, we wax and wane on the amount of independence the RBI has. So it's not a unidirectional move.
Right. For years, people have been talking about India hitting a growth rate of 8 to 9%, being the next China. We haven't quite got that.
Yes.
What are we doing wrong, or what should we do to get to 8 to 9%?
So I think one of the major achievements over the last few years, both by the UPA and the NDA government, has been macro stabilization. We've worked on bringing the fiscal deficit down. We've worked on bringing inflation down. In fact, today, I was meeting an Indian entrepreneur who told me that he's now able to get financing from outside, minus the additional 6% they used to charge because the rupee was so volatile and inflation was so high.
Right.
So financing costs have come down because of our macro stability.
Right.
That's good. The downside in the last few years is that the micro implementation has lagged behind, whether it's because the government officials aren't willing to take decisions, because we've got an excessive amount of centralization. It's less clear why that's happened. But think, Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. Every international conference I went to, I said, this is coming. This is China-style mega projects. Where is it?
Yeah, it's just implementation is our problem.
Implementation.
Which they are just wonderful at in China.
And to some extent,
we have the ideas, but we're just not implementing.
No, and
them,
also we need to search out the bottlenecks. I think, in implementation, land acquisition is a bottleneck. Can we fix it? If the Land Acquisition Act is preventing us, why don't we modify it? The many millions of jobs that come from construction,
yes,
that will come from industry that sets up around infrastructure.
Right.
We're missing out on that. So that seems much more important in terms of the next step than almost anything else. The other place where we know what to do, we're not able to do it, is power. We're at the point where we can give 24/7 power to anybody in the country and benefit from that, because the people getting the power will earn better incomes, but the people producing the power will finally have plant load factors which allow them to make a profit and pay back their banks. So from both sides, what's standing in the middle? The distribution companies. We've had 3 goes at it. Last one was Uday. I don't think that we have evidence that Uday is working. We need to look at it and understand why it's not having the effect that was promised and make changes that are necessary there.
See, these are key issues you raise. Micro level management of construction and big infrastructure projects is lacking, and what you mentioned just now, that
the power sector
is just,
it needs to be revitalized. These are central.
And we know it, but we just can't seem to be able to do it. So given these bottlenecks, do you think it's going to be possible for India? What kind of growth rate do you think we can achieve realistically?
Well, look,
is 8 to 9%?
We'll get back to, we were at 8 before the sort of slowdown. We'll get back to that.
We will.
I think that, to some extent, given our entrepreneurs, given our young population, we will do that. And now we've got some tailwinds coming from things like, the GST eventual successful GST launch. However, every year there will be a new shock.
Yep.
This year interest rates are going to go up. Some of the money will start getting a little worried. Oil prices are going up. So that underlying growth of 8 is going to be affected by these kinds of shocks. To really get those jobs that we really need in India, we need to have an underlying growth of 9 or 10, which means all these micro level reforms, including education. We need good students being produced. I was just talking to the president of the World Bank, and one of the things they are worried about, which we've been worried about in India for a long time, is a tremendous number of malnutritioned kids.
Yes.
Who are going to come out in the labor force without the kind of mental capability.
Actually, NDTV is just going to do a campaign on hidden hunger.
Exactly.
Because news channels love covering when there's a famine or some big event and 30 children are died, but millions of children are dying, or there's this hidden hunger which puts them at a terrible disadvantage in a slow process.
Exactly.
And that needs to be talked about. I'm
Exactly.
glad you raised that.
Whatever education improvements we do are going to be sort of wasted in some sense if these kids grow up with the stunting in growth, in mental capabilities that don't allow them to participate. We are sort of condemning them. If there was one sort of priority in the country from a social perspective, it should be this.
Hidden hunger is a terrible problem which is not yet emphasized enough, I think, by the media or by anybody. There are a lot of people say this is Davos, and a lot of focus of attention is on foreign investment and foreign FDI. And the World Bank, you were talking about the World Bank, reminded me, they show that China has about 5 to 6 times the FDI per year that India has. Now, foreign investment, FDI, does affect your growth rate. In fact, I've followed China since the first McDonald's came to China. I used to go to China when everybody was on a bicycle. And then FDI came in a wave, and it's still in a wave. We are about 30 to 40 billion. They're about 200 billion a year. How can we get more FDI into India? Well, why aren't we getting it?
Yeah, to some extent, we are 1/5 the size of China as an economy. So 1/5, 1/6 FDI is presumably sort of par for the course given our size. However,
if we want to get to that level.
If we want to get to that level, one of the concerns we should have is when you look at global supply chains, we underperform. We are less part of the global supply chains than other countries.
Yes.
So, how do we remedy that? And I think it goes back to these micro-level reforms. How do we get first-class infrastructure? China built out the infrastructure, but also it had, the kind of base on which firms that came in could build. So it had a fairly well-educated population that people could hire into the factories. It had, unleashed animal spirits in the village enterprises and so on. Now, I don't think we need to imitate China, and probably it's not feasible to do that. But if we build out our infrastructure, if we have 24/7 power, minimum requirements for people to invest.
These two simple things would be your prescriptions to try and hit 8 to 9%?
Well, and I think we definitely can if we focus on this. Construction will create so many jobs. You remember People Live, he sort of moved into a construction job. But there are much more value-added construction jobs that we can have. But I think more than that, we have our own strengths. the strength of our IT industry that people admire, but I would also say the strength of our entrepreneurship as well as the confidence that our entrepreneurs have that their property rights are secure, which doesn't necessarily exist in other countries.
So you're saying India is a bit like my golf, full of potential, but I haven't achieved it in 50 years.
No, look, I'm more optimistic that we'll do it. I think that we need a consensus on the kinds of buttons that we need to push. I mean, certainly the government has done some of that with, say, the GST as well as the bankruptcy code reforms. But I think that some of the things that people expected would happen in terms of revitalizing the projects that were moribund and the big sort of dream projects, Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, those we need more
I think the general kind of feeling is there are ideas, there are thoughts, but they're just nothing is being implemented. Not nothing, but there's very poor implementation on the ground, which is the key to employment and the growth rate.
Well, and we need to understand what the bottlenecks there are, because it's not that we don't have smart bureaucrats. Now, Mr. Jaitley has repeatedly talked about repealing the the acts which sort of hold officers responsible for taking decisions if they unduly benefit some private party, even if there's no gratification involved. So there may be, and I don't know, there may be an overhang of worry amongst bureaucrats to take decisions given the corruption cases and so on that have taken place. I don't know. This may be an excuse, this may be reality. But we really have to look at why we're not moving faster on implementation.
Yeah. There's been various people in the government, ministers have said that to increase growth rate, we are going to double India's agricultural income, each farmer's, double it by 2022. Double in 5-6 years income, that's going at 14% a year in agriculture. I'm an agricultural economist. Unless you get your soil moisture content at perfect levels throughout the country, you're not going to get that. Is there any hope? Because agriculture today is meant to be suffering more than ever before. And it was slightly reflected in the Gujarat elections also, where the ruling party did well in the cities, but very poorly in rural areas. How does one get farmers producing more, earning more?
Well, I think that's a question that has faced every government. And clearly, the answer cannot be get them indebted and then sort of waive their loans. That seems like a fiscal
like
transfer.
A true banker.
Well,
don't get them indebted anyway.
Arundhati Bhattacharya has talked frequently about this. I've talked about it. The costs of sort of vitiating the credit culture. I think that we really need to invest more. We need to figure out what optimal farm sizes are, what optimal sizes are for the kinds of crops that are grown.
They should talk to me. My PhD was on farm size and productivity.
Absolutely.
They should do the opposite of what I say.
Well, that may hold for all us economists. But really, again, we don't have a dearth of ideas in the farm sector. And, there are various projects underway, but really revitalizing that. And the problem to some extent is that every once in a while we sort of fall under this, old style thinking, oh, we have to preserve them on the farms. No, the only way you're going to make farming viable is to get most of the people off the farms, into rural industry, into other kinds
like China has done actually,
and leave a smaller number on the farms who now farm it much more efficiently and then can get adequate incomes. To have more and more people depending on that farm without productivity will do something for you, but really it can't support so many people. I mean, the US used to have 40% of its people in agriculture at the turn of the 20th century. Now it's 3% or 4%. And they produce more than the 40% used to produce.
Yep.
That's the only way we're going to do it, that we need to figure out ways, alternatives.
So coming to one of your favorite topics and the current situation, things were going pretty well, but this last year has been a few slippages. We've seen slight signs of inflation coming back. We've seen a slight fiscal slippage and the current account deficit. Now, what can be done by the government and the RBI to reverse this again? Because it's not a healthy trend.
Yeah, look, I think that on the RBI side, presumably the Monetary Policy Committee will do what it takes to keep inflation under control. But of course, with rising oil prices, there is a spillover into inflation, which we have to be wary of, and they'll have to think about it. I think on the growth side, our main problem is not too little demand. Our main problem is supply side constraints. And therefore, we need to fix those constraints. I think slowly they are being fixed. I mean, some of the adversity from last year will dissipate. But I think at this point, with the world raising interest rates, with money starting to flow out, markets seem extremely complacent at this point, but they'll wake up at some point. So with the Fed sort of on a path to tighten, this is the wrong time to abandon the macro stability we've achieved over the last few years. So I would say there should be more focus on the programs we've already announced to make them work. Take a close look at what's not working, what needs to be fixed.
That's in the distribution of
power, electricity, the program.
So you're saying look at the real economy, get that right, and don't worry too much about interest rates. So you don't think interest rates are too high in India?
I don't think, if you look at real interest rates, most people look at the current real interest rate and say, oh, real interest rates are really high. You have to look a little ahead, what's going to come. And if you look at what's coming, I think real interest rates in India are not out of sync with the rest of the world, especially
really?
Given... Look, what is inflation? If you project inflation, I'm going to guess. I don't know anything about the details, but it's about 5% now. Yes, the last number is lower, but it's anticipating about 5%. Where is the policy rate? It's at 6. So there's a 1% real interest rate. Where is
it fair to look at the policy rate? Because the real rate is,
I think the long-term bond rate is telling you the anxiety of the market.
Yes, that's
rather
true.
Than the reverse. It's telling you that the market actually thinks that inflation may be higher, which is why those long bonds have picked up.
Yes.
So I think this would be a good time to reiterate our, desire for macro stability. The problem is not too much demand. The problem is fixing the supply sort of shackles. And over time, as sort of the international environment normalizes, maybe we get more space. But right now, I would say do the implementation.
So stick to a tight monetary policy, stick to the current interest rates, don't lower them, look at the real economy and get that working. That's the main focus.
I would just not use the word tight monetary policy. I would use appropriate monetary policy.
Oh, that's like...
don't use this. Don't be adventurous on fiscal either, because we have the state governments already sort of with tight balance sheets, and they're adding to the fiscal. So be careful overall, but focus on implementation and the projects that are already announced underway. Move them forward.
But don't lower interest rates.
Look, again, monetary policy...
Be a man, say it.
No, I don't want to give any...
Man or a mouse?
No, I'm a mouse as far as monetary policy goes. I think the Monetary Policy Committee has too much advice from too many people. It should do what it thinks is appropriate. And I'm not going to add my voice to the voice of... all I will say is that, they're trying to do a creditable job. They should be allowed to do it.
And if you were there, you would not lower interest rates.
How many ways are you going to get me to commit?
But I think I know the answer, actually. Right. So, but there is a worry about the slippage in the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit. And you're saying that needs also to be handled fast?
Well, the current account deficit is going to widen from where it was because of oil prices. There's nothing very much you can do. You can try and improve the climate for exports, given the global environment, which is very healthy, by fixing any supply issues. We've heard some issues about GST and so on with the exporters. But whatever they are, let's try and fix those.
These things
exactly.
are opportunities that come once in a while.
There are opportunities, and also, India's sort of image outside, if you don't fix these fast, could get damaged. Because
you hear that a bit at Davos.
there are sort of ripple effects from having a bad performance in a quarter or two.
You know, I hate to say that when the oil prices were high, we heard that's our biggest problem. When they came down by half, nobody said, wow, great, India is now going to hit 12% growth rate. We just didn't seem to take full advantage of it. And now it's going back up a little bit. Now you're saying, oh God, oil price is going up. So is it a one-way trip? If it goes up, it's terrible. If it's down, it's not better.
No, I think we benefited from it. I wouldn't say we took advantage of it. We benefited from it.
How?
But well, our growth was higher. In the years that the oil price came down and was low,
would see a primary factor was oil prices
yeah,
low?
was an important factor.
Maybe a couple of percent on GDP growth?
I think the estimate that I've seen from JP Morgan is about that. So it did help us. And of course, what comes down, sometimes goes up. And it's
only the other way around.
Well, yeah.
But
in this case,
in monetary economics, the other, what goes down will come up one day.
Absolutely.
Right. So bottom line on the inflation point, how would you control inflation in India?
Well, look, I think, over time, the issue is to get expectations of higher inflation down, which is what, central bank has been doing over time.
You do much the same as what they're doing right now?
No, again, you're getting me to opine on.
It's only innocent question.
Look, all I'm saying is we've got the right structure. We've got a monetary policy committee, and they understand what their task is. They have to keep inflation between 2 and 6.
So you're just sounding like the cricket commentators. If India bats well, bowls well, and especially fielding, if they field well, we'll win the match.
Yeah.
So if they do all those things, if they
look, I'm trying to avoid giving prescriptions. I think we have the right structure. They'll do what is necessary. I'm happy to give other prescriptions, but I want to stay off.
Why?
It's a matter of dharma. I sort of think the dharma of a former governor
right.
is really to not interfere in what because people sort of think that you have some special knowledge, which you don't.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I wouldn't buy that.
And well, you have a sound committee, well appointed by the government. Let them take the decisions.
Okay, there is a lot of optimism now coming to the global economy, about the global economy. It's doing very well. Do you share that optimism? Because I remember in 2005, you forecast the 2008 crash. The bubble was going to burst, and everybody said, come on. Larry Summers said, he's just lost it. Now, they respect you for that. Are you more worried about the economy, global economy now than you were then, or less worried?
I'm less worried, but I'm worried.
You are worried?
I'm worried. I'm less worried about the banks. We did a lot to fix them post-global crisis.
Global banks, all
global banks.
Yes,
they've got more capital and so on. However, we didn't sort of have uniform regulation across the system. So some of the risks that were in the banks have migrated elsewhere. More important,
elsewhere meaning
into the shadow banking system, as they call it, the mutual funds, the pension funds, and so on. But I think more dangerous is that all this time we've given monetary policy a pass and said that was not responsible. And to some extent, 8 years of very, very low interest rates and they're pumping money into the system by buying government bonds. Very easy liquidity is something that the system gets addicted to, and it gets addicted by building up debt. So it needs yet more liquidity in order to keep that debt current. And leverage has built up in the corporate system. There was a lot of talk of covenant-light loans before the previous crisis. They're now 4 or 5 times their size at that time. So there are all kinds of levered positions in the market. When the tide of liquidity flows out, which it's in the process of, because the Fed has already stopped sort of reinvesting in bonds, the ECB will probably stop later this year or slow down QE tremendously. And the Bank of Japan is making noises, but it will follow. When all those guys stop pumping money into the markets get much tighter. So, Mohammed Al-Arian has a nice phrase, yes, but world. Yes, the global economies, the strong ones, are growing very, very well. It's a good time for India because the global environment is strong. and our exports should be doing well. But there's a lot of financial fragility that may have built up, and we won't really know where.
And you're saying it's a financial, you haven't used the word bubble, but I think Ruchir Sharma talks about the quantity of financial assets is now 3 times GDP. It used to be the same as GDP, now 3 times. Never happened before in history. There is an element of bubble in that?
Well, I mean, certainly there are some places where we've seen bubble-like feeling. Bitcoin is one example. Here is the, I would say, almost a classic definition of bubble, right?
Yeah.
It has no real use.
Right.
Even the transaction use we talk about seems to be, very costly and slowing down. Obviously, the underlying technology is useful, but we've seen this being bid up to near 20,000 levels,
and then dropping by,
and then it's dropped by
10,
half.
yeah.
So it is an issue that there are these places where you see at
bubbles
least
kind
froth.
of. But you're saying even mutual funds and other areas that's a bit of a worry for you?
No, I think there are places that people have congregated on in the market, places where there's yield to be had. And of course, as the money sort of flows out, these yields will start popping up quite significantly, and therefore will jeopardize the value of those holdings. So I think that's a potential concern. And of course, our pension funds, our mutual funds have gone out on the risk spectrum when there was nothing was really earning that much.
So that is a worry. So you're worried, but not as worried as you were in 2005, or there is a kind of...
No, look, I would say the good news is strong growth. The bad news is financial fragility, potentially.
There is financial fragility.
Yes, and because of high leverage. And the question is how these two sort of interact. If there is a sense of inflation picking up much more strongly, the central banks are forced to withdraw liquidity much faster. That creates more tension in the financial sector.
And is it true, I mean, just as a economist, monetary economist, if one bubble bursts somewhere, not bitcoins, it's too remote, that has a multiplier effect and everybody gets worried, and there's a much bigger, it has an impact on other aspects of the monetary.
Well, it sort of breaks the sort of narrative, in Bob Schiller's words, of, everything is going up. We talked about going up and going down. Well, if everything's going up and then suddenly you see something crashing to half its value, you sort of say,
what's next?
What else is bubbly?
Right.
So it has that potential.
Right. I don't know, this is completely different, not monetary economics, but the 5 biggest companies in the world today are all tech companies. There's Apple, there's Google, Alphabet, there's Amazon, there's Facebook, there's Microsoft. Is that a bubble? I mean, these 5 companies are worth $3.5 trillion. Is that a worry?
Well, I don't know if it's a bubble. I mean, some of these companies are also the most profitable in the world. And so, people are discounting very healthy profits also. I do think that it raises questions about how open, now that these companies are there, the field is for smaller companies to innovate and grow. And
there's a concentration now.
Whether there's concentration, there's an antitrust issue. And I think we have to be very careful about this, because these pose different antitrust issues from the older antitrust issues. These are very efficient companies. These are companies that give you a lot of services for free, because they're charging somebody else.
Their value is more than India's GDP. I mean,
but that's
comparing apples with
oranges.
Absolutely.
But I would say that.
But would you say they're overvalued?
I don't know. I think they're very profitable. This is
which is unlike the 2000 bubble, where nobody was making money and they were.
There is some backing for this, but of course there's also a belief that they will retain this stronger position, and the only thing that will upset that is growing fears from the broader public and a demand for regulation.
In these top 10 great companies, most highly valued companies, there are many Chinese companies. Now, China took the route of stopping foreigners from coming into e-commerce, into all kinds of internet, no WhatsApp, they had their own version. And they've created 10 cents, which is worth 500 billion. There's Alibaba, another 400 billion. India's allowed everybody to come in, and Amazon's doing well, and Uber's doing well. And did China get it right, or we got it right, or we remember our old import substitution? What should we have done? Because it's quite tough for an Indian company to take on these huge giants.
No, it is a very, very good question, and I don't have a pat response here. No, we should have left it open, or yes, we should have closed. Because one of the things that's different here from our old style protectionism is there are significant scale economies in this kind of business. And therefore, somebody who comes in with the ability to bring these scale economies has a little bit of an advantage over somebody starting anew. So our Indian corporations may have a slight, some disadvantage in going up against an Amazon or an Uber, and it's worth thinking about it. That said, we still have some Indian competitors, the Olas and the
but they're finding it very tough. While in China, Uber sold out to the local Chinese.
Yeah. But there's an old saying, right? What doesn't kill you makes you healthier. So, I will say that the jury is out on what the right approach is. And
because you see $500 billion company, and you think, man, China's got that right by import substitution and non-globalization, which they are trumping.
I think it's certainly worth thinking. I also think that we will have to spend a fair amount of time thinking about issues of data protection. Who owns the data? Should the data be locally stored and locally owned rather than stored elsewhere?
The biggest search engine in India, the most popular, that has 60% of the market, is a Chinese search engine.
Right. So, these are issues both from the security perspective, but also, what happens if there is an incident? Where do Indian courts have jurisdiction over? Those are issues that we will have to confront. So, I think, I like the Supreme Court decision on the right to privacy, and I think it is ahead of a number of other countries. But we need to think about all these issues as we,
And I keep coming back to what you said so correctly. Think about it, but implement it as well. Make sure it happens, because you can say we want right to privacy, but then it slips here and slips there, and it's one area. Last bit, a little bit about you personally. You have, honestly, I'm not just saying it to your face, widely considered to be the finest RBI governor India's ever had. Do you miss the job? Did you enjoy it?
First, disservice to a lot of other governors, but I enjoyed the job tremendously, and I enjoy the people around me. It's a fantastic group.
Institution.
As an institution, it was one of the few institutions that I actually genuinely say has stood the test of time without descending into the sort of malaise that some of other institutions have descended into. Still stalwart people. Like any institution, there are some people who don't pull their weight. Right. But by and large, a really strong set of people, and very capable, and the young people were in many ways a delight. That from many of India's sort of broad spectrum of educational institutions, they come in, given a challenge, they go away for 3 weeks and come back with something really good.
I remember a wonderful thing you told me, that you get so many suggestions as RBI governor, and you read them and put it aside, and what makes you not sleep too well is, have I missed one really significant, like your 2005, which so many people missed? Is there another young Raghuram Rajan who sent it to you and you said, nutcase?
No, and given the volume of mail you get, that's always the possibility. And so you have these 30-page closely spaced documents, handwritten, where you're wondering, is this guy a genius, or is this a crackpot? Am I going to be sort of ignoring the new Keynes? So it's difficult. It takes a lot of time to actually. I think
the only positive thing is that you at least worried about that. Not the others, let's just put it aside. But would you have liked a second term?
No, look, that's life moves on. Life moves on, and
and the answer is yes.
No, look, let me, I've said this before, the task was unfinished, but I think, it's in perfectly good hands, and, I have other things to do. It wasn't as if I went into retirement.
You
I have a busy
offered
life.
Rajya Sabha membership. Why did you should have just grabbed it, shouldn't you?
Look, I think my official statement was I have a job, and I'm doing it. I don't want to confirm or deny.
Unofficial job? Unofficial answer?
Well, no, the
last thing you'd ever want.
I love my job in academia. At the same time, I feel a sense of obligation to India. So I try and keep a foot in both worlds.
You brought out this wonderful book, and like everything with you, diametrically opposite reactions. Like everything you do, if I remember, has diametrically opposite. The people loved your book, the government or the authorities or the ruling, I won't say party, the ruling elite didn't like your book. Were you a little shocked at how much people liked it and how much people disliked it, or you're used to that?
No, look, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that.
Reactions.
What I thought was important was to just lay out why we did what we did, because in a democracy, we set out on a path and explain why each one. And then some people, will say that, why are you explaining in such detail? And the idea was to say, here's what we did and why we did it. And with the hope that, the underlying rationale would allow support to continue for some of these actions.
Right. That was a very complicated answer to a simple question, but we leave it at that.
I don't worry. In the University of Chicago, when you go to a seminar, you take such pounding that you stop worrying about what people say, and you obviously
really
need to pay attention.
Are we getting a demonstration here?
Yeah.
In Davos, a demonstration.
But there are about 10 people there, so they're loud, but there are only 10.
Yeah. You do get a pounding in Chicago. A close friend of mine went to Chicago to do his PhD many years ago, and the first thing he was told, look at the person on your left, everybody was told, on your right, if either of them get through, you're not getting through. I mean, man, you have to be tough to be in Chicago.
Right.
It's a wonderful university.
It's great, and focus on ideas is important.
So, if you're offered to be the finance minister after the 2019 general elections, would you take it?
So I was told when I was coached by the IMF on how to respond to questions that never answer a hypothetical question.
Oh,
so look, the truth is, I'm perfectly happy being back in academia. I'm working on a book. I'm working on an educational institution in India, which we're trying to set up a liberal arts university. Some very fine people in the south working on it.
Oh, great!
So
great.
my life is full. I don't need more complications.
So, depends on the offer, the opportunity. Hypothetically, we'll leave that. And most importantly, the budget's about to happen. What would you like to see in it?
Well, I think I would like to see a continuation of the process the government has been on, which is maintain a reasonable fiscal stance and focus on getting what has already been announced. So many yojanas, projects, and let's complete them.
Just get them done.
Get them done. And I think that would be enormous benefit to the country.
In Chicago, do you sit there sometimes when you're getting pounded by your students and you can't hear them and you think, yeah, there are some tasks I left undone, or my favorite couple of tasks which I was doing at the RBI which I couldn't complete?
No, look.
You're so cautious.
No, I'm just trying to be reflective.
Do you reflect on something unfinished?
No, there is certainly unfinished stuff, but I think the progress is being made on that, which is what I'm actually very happy about, that these structures that we put together, people have taken ownership in the Reserve Bank of those structures and moving them forward. So I think to some extent it would have been much more disappointing if we had all worked together on these changes, and then you leave and everything drops.
But it hasn't.
The fact that people have continued on cleaning up the banking system, on the monetary policy approach, suggests that people have taken ownership, and they deserve to do that because it was part of their ideas.
Well, thank you very much, and just end with what I started with, that you make us proud and India misses you. And time to come back.
Thank you. Well,
God bless you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.